begin our library budget meeting, and note that Lisa Woolfork is attending today remotely due to a medical condition that prevents her physical attendance. So we've got Linda and who else? We're only missing.
Thomas is on the way. He should be here shortly.
Okay, so I would just thank everybody for coming. Thank also very much for having to do everything over twice and gave us all up-to-date information. And I hope everybody had time. At least everybody read the intro. That didn't change. And David did correct the award.
2002 to 2010.
And a couple minor typographical errors. And so we move on today to see, our task is to look at both proposals, consider the implications for both of the ideas presented, especially the proposed changes or personnel requests that were submitted by the Personnel Committee, and take a look at that. And I'm actually do want to say that one very nice thing I think that happened that David pointed out in his little summary was that inadvertently the pandemic did lead us to one of our goals, which was outreach to the community. So we have added some very good things, especially to Nelson and Louisa. So we're very happy, but also I think we're on the right path. So we'll continue to do that moving forward. Also, a big thank you to everyone on the Personnel Committee and everybody who's contributed to this, and the staff who was always there. So thank you. So I'll let you two experts go through and we'll chime in, or you tell me.
Okay. So Wendy, I propose that we will just review. We'll start with the
Priorities one.
the top priorities included. So everybody has in front of them paper copies, except for those joining virtually here, of two versions of a proposed budget. And let's start by looking at the one that has the top priorities of the Personnel Committee included. So the Personnel Committee reviewed 14 suggestions from JMRL managers for either new positions or changes to positions that had an operational cost for next fiscal year. They selected 10 of them for inclusion to the budget committee here, prioritized those. There were two clear top priorities that they wanted to make sure got included, and then the rest of them they added in orders 3 through 10. The version that we're looking at here includes all of those with the exception of 2 new positions at the Northside Library. So we will talk about those separately when we talk about the new positions, but let's do a kind of a 10,000 foot view of the budget first, then we can start talking about those individual decisions or any other questions that you all have. So first, thanks to Jennifer McAdam Miller for our beautiful cover this year. It's very clean and friendly, and we really like it. And there were several typos in the narrative. Thank you all for catching them. It had the incorrect day that the library board was meeting. It said, what did it say, Lindsay? The first Monday. Yeah, it's the 4th Monday of every month. It named Wendy as the board vice president when that's Aleta's role. And it said that the Library of the Year award, for which we are very proud, for 2022 was from 2002. So, and the joke I made to AJ was, don't worry, 20 years from now, I'm still going to be crowing about the 2022 Library of the Year award. Okay, and then we get into the meat of the budget. So is this, Krista, can you see this? Does this need to be bigger on the screen?
I can see it, but I'm also looking on my own screen. Over
Okay,
here.
so on page 3 of your budget package here, both packets have the same numbering. They're both 20 pages. The only difference is in the dollar amounts here and at the north side page. This is what we refer to locally as the grid sheet because it's shaped like a grid. And it is a breakdown of the total expected costs for JMRL services for fiscal year 24. So at the very top there, these are the regional costs, these three categories. It's administration, library administration. So that's my job, AJ's job, the folks that are charged with the governance of the library on the staff end. The technical services division, which is led by Kayla Payne, and that includes processing and cataloging, our traditional library technical services, the IT department, the collection development department, and the digital services department. So those are all regional costs. The benefits of those serve all 5 jurisdictions at JMRL. And then this is a confusing one, but per the regional agreement, regional reference services are charged to the central library, except 10% of them are paid regionally. So Albemarle, Charlottesville, Greene, Louisa, and Nelson share in 10% of those costs, and that's written out in the regional agreement. The way that these are divided, these costs by jurisdiction, is a 3-year average of circulation figures. So the theory there is that no 1-year swing will lead to a dramatic impact one way or the other for any jurisdiction. For example, the new Nelson renovation and the new collection there, if it wasn't a 3-year average, it might be a big swing and uptake of usage there, but it's meant to normalize it a bit. Those numbers are at the top, so you can see for the last 3 years ending at the end of fiscal year 22, Albemarle patrons use JMRL services. They use 60%, basically 60.1. Charlottesville 23.88, Greene 6.37, Louisa 5.2, Nelson 4.45.
David, can I interrupt first?
Please.
Could you just remind me what we did for those usership numbers during the pandemic?
We maintained the same, we split the pot. The pot was smaller. There was less checkouts happening, but it was still what percentage of use was from each jurisdiction.
Okay.
So this includes the pandemic years.
We're still working through
years,
that,
right?
yeah.
It won't be until several years from now that we're out of that. They're largely these, the usership was the same ratios.
Okay.
You know, Albemarle,
Overall was down,
yeah.
but then-
Now,
Yeah.
Albemarle and Charlottesville usage has been creeping up over the last 5 years, even pre-pandemic, and the smaller jurisdictions creeping down a bit. Some of that might have to do with the huge demand for digital resources and the availability of broadband in the Charlottesville and Albemarle area. So we're expecting that to swing as we get more broadband coming to Louisa, Greene, and Nelson. Okay, and then there's a breakdown of each location, basically. And you'll see some numbers here on the side, which are other percentages. So these are similar. The central, Gordon, and north side are shared costs between Charlottesville and Albemarle County, and that's also an average of 3 years of usage at those locations only. So it's always a surprise when we sit down and talk with Albemarle that almost 57% of the usage of the central library is from Albemarle patrons that live in Albemarle that use those services. And 43 Charlottesville. It's about 50-50 at Gordon Avenue, and then it's about 80-20 here at the north side branch. So those costs are split between, we'll get into what the individual costs are as we get deeper in the budget, but they're split between Charlottesville and Albemarle for central, Charlottesville and Albemarle for Gordon, Charlottesville and Albemarle for north side. Then we get into the local costs only. So these are branches that are supported by their single jurisdiction. And that means that they pay for the staff, personnel costs, and the operating costs there. So starting with Scottsville, which is an Albemarle cost only, Prose, an Albemarle cost only. Louisa County, a Louisa County cost only. Nelson County, Nelson only. Greene County, Greene only. We have the bookmobile, which is an 80%, 20% split between Charlottesville and Albemarle. This one's a bit confusing just the way it shows up here, because that has been only Charlottesville and Albemarle for quite a long time now. It's written in the regional agreement that any what they call extension services have to be by separate contract with JMRL. So it's not part of the regional agreement, and only Charlottesville and Albemarle have been paying into that. So for this new budget in fiscal year 24, JMRL is proposing some bookmobile and outreach service costs, some services to Louisa and Nelson County. So those are at $7,200, almost $7,300 each. And it would come with bookmobile service to each of them 2 Fridays a month, basically. This came per request from Louisa County last year in discussions during budget season. And then in discussions with Nelson County. There's also an opportunity there to leverage some of the fundraising from the Grow Nelson Library Committee to add I don't really know how to describe it, but it looks like a red box for library materials. So if you've seen a red box at the grocery store where you can get DVDs, it's like a vending machine that's a 24-hour library you put in an area that has an awning, electricity, Wi-Fi, and people can check out and pick up their library materials from that location. So in Nelson County, it would go someplace away from the Nelson Memorial Library and it would be considered an outreach service, but the machine itself would be paid for by the Grow Nelson Library crew. The Historical Society position that JMRL funds is a 50-50 split between Charlottesville and Albemarle, as is the Monticello Avenue services. Okay. So those are all the projected expenses, and the total there, without any changes, is $8.619777, so $8.6 million. For those of you who were on the board last year, you'll remember that we began a minimum wage adjustment program where starting this July, we raised the bottom level of JMRL's pay scale to $15 an hour and moved every position that made, every individual that made up to $17 along to prevent compression at the very bottom of the pay scale, although it came with its own compression above that. The library board agreed last year to a plan that basically took on 2/3 of the funding for that in this current fiscal year and moved 1/3 of the cost to it to our jurisdictions. This budget is year 2 of that, in which those numbers flip. So JMRL is going to offer a credit out of our general fund for 1/3 of the costs of the program, and the jurisdictions will take on 2/3. The following year, the costs will be entirely on the jurisdictions. So this credit here is JMRL's share of that minimum wage adjustment. So we're still paying for it out of our reserve fund. And it has gone well so far this year. AJ and I are tracking the expenditures and the math we did now a year and a half ago, or I did a year and a half ago.
It's holding.
It's still holding, yes. So then the line below that is the actual net, what we would ask our jurisdictions to contribute. Okay, and you can see there, the line below that is the current year. So this is what they're paying this year. The line below that is the dollar change for each jurisdiction. The line below that is the percent change. So we'll just go through those one at a time. Albemarle County, the request for next year in this budget, and this is the budget that is only the top priorities, is $4.9 million for an increase of $260,000, which is a 5.2% increase. So that's a substantial increase for Albemarle County. A couple things are driving that. You know, if we have the 5% increase in medical costs that we're assuming, that might end up coming down before the end of budget season. That was we contract with, JMRL contracts with the city of Charlottesville for benefits for staff, and their prediction for next year's budgeting for medical costs is going to be a 5% increase. This also includes Albemarle paying the lion's share of the minimum wage adjustments because they have the lion's share of the personnel costs for JMRL. And an increase in the rent for this building for the Northside Library. It is by lease agreement with Albemarle County tied to the CPI, which is an inflation measure in some sense. So that has been very, very high recently. So we're looking at a dollar amount increase next year for rent here from what we budgeted last year of up to $80,000 for Albemarle. That might change between now and May as well. That number isn't finalized until May, but it's a significant impact. Okay, for Charlottesville, the proposed budget is $2.134 million. It's $2,075,000 this year. It's an increase of just a hair under $60,000, 2.9% increase. So many of the same factors that impacted Albemarle that I just laid out also true for Charlottesville.
I just want to jump back for a
Please.
minute. Is the lease with, obviously with Northside with the building, year to year?
No, it's a semi-permanent lease, basically. The lease was signed when JMRL took occupancy of the building, and it gets renewed on a rolling basis. I think it's every 5 years.
So the driver for this year's rent is simply inflation?
There's a clause in there, there's an escalator clause that determines how the county is going to apply increases in rent, and it's based on inflation, basically, like what inflationary costs are gonna be. It's a fraction that's like the CPI of the year that that we took occupancy divided by the current CPI in May, or one way or the other, and then you apply that to the rent to see what the escalation should be. And it is a legally binding document that we have with the county. So it's something to discuss with the county moving forward, because this is certainly unprecedented inflation. And I don't think that their intention was to try to squeeze, every dollar out, especially since they have to then pay it back. It's not exactly like, now that it gets paid partially by Charlottesville as well by that 80-20 split here. So 20% of that rent is a cost for Charlottesville. So they also saw an increase in the rent of this building. It's 20% of the usage at Charlottesville. For Greene County, there is actually a decrease in costs. The proposed this year is about almost $3,000 less than last year. So, Martha, this makes an easy sell for you, and I agree.
Got the easy stuff here.
And that is largely driven by declining percentage of usage in Greene County. They're not checking out overall as much of the collection as they were for that 3-year average.
But that also could be said because they're using the virtual stuff.
It's the same, yeah, it's more of an increase. Our overall circulation numbers have been down the last few years because of COVID. We did reach 1.6 million last year, which is a very good number during a COVID year, but that's still down from the high water mark of where JMRL has been.
So the circulation numbers for the counties do not include electronic?
They do, but they're not being used at the same clip as they are in Charlottesville and Albemarle. So that adds to a higher percentage of overall use for Charlottesville and Albemarle. For Louisa County, the costs are $407,000. That's up from $391,000 last year. That's about a $15,000 increase, a little under 4%. And Wendy, so when you and I talked to Louisa County about this, the big thing is that $7,200 of that is for that bookmobile service. So they can make a choice on that end about whether or not they want to add that service for that cost. It certainly seems like a good deal to provide service, especially on the western end of the county where there's a lot of population that could use library services there. Same story in Nelson County. The increase is about $13,000, and that also includes that $7,200 for the outreach services that they can make a decision about whether or not to add. Okay, so that's the grid sheet. The next sheet is a summary sheet, basically. Like, here's everything all at once. Here are all the individual categories. So largely these categories are driven by the financial software that we use. It's called SAP, which stands for I don't know what, but it's the budgeting software that the city of Charlottesville uses, that we use, that AJ works with. So these are the categories that money gets actually spent out of. This is what it's called. AJ probably knows them by a number, like a 5-digit number.
Yeah, that's what they're called in your world.
In the world,
In my world, they're all numbers.
5001100 is office supplies. Something else is postage. So we had a question earlier today about like, oh, what if there's no data in one of these? Like, for example, the food supplies there in 2022, $493 was spent there, but nothing was budgeted for this year and nothing is budgeted for next year. And basically it's that we weren't expecting to spend that money. It got credited to that account or whatnot. And really we would call like food. I'm not sure what food supplies is, but there's another category that meals that likely is where that money should have come out of. So
like contracted services, which is 13K plus. That might be distributed in other categories now.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, because that seems like a large amount.
yeah, it is a big amount. Yeah.
So some of these, Martha, are things that Charlottesville will directly charge our accounts on. And some of them are contracted services where we wouldn't have control over, oh, it would have fit better in this budget line. right? And so Charlottesville could say, hey, we contracted with the elevator company to fix whatever, well, elevators, to fix whatever, Northside isn't working, so maybe it's a tough example, Lindsay, I'm sorry. But anyway, they can contract, I know, with a vendor to provide a service or whatnot, and they can directly charge our accounts, right? And so you will see in 2022, oh, there was an actual expense to, let's say, contracted services, but that was an unbudgeted expense, right? That wasn't something that we had said we were going to spend money on X. And if it was something that we were going to spend money on, I would have put it in something that was budgeted, like one-time building maintenance, employee reimbursements. And so it's kind of like they put it in this line. I would have charged it to this line, but when it all washes out, we already had money there for it. It just wasn't through this exact charge code. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because when I look at the one time, of 36 and I do the 13 and 15,
Correct. That's exactly how you kind of have to marry them together.
okay.
We don't have to go line through line here, but I don't want to miss any questions that the committee might have about individual choices for next fiscal year. A general rule of thumb, when possible, is that we would do an average of the expenses of the last 3 years to try and determine what we think next year's costs will be for any particular area there. Now, COVID threw a ringer in that, right? Like there are expenses, and this doesn't show, AJ's whole sheet has like 5 years of data, so if it was medical supplies, for instance, was a category. So 2 years ago, we spent a lot of money in medical supplies on getting all sorts of PPE for our staff that we're no longer having to buy at that clip. So, we might look at that and say, well, a 3-year average of that probably is not a realistic picture for what we're going to need for next year. And we might under budget that average number. So no oil and grease expenses last year. We're good on oil and grease.
All good on oil and grease, yes.
All right. So any questions about any individual expense there or projected expense?
Why did they, their initial quotes for health insurance were that high?
No, the health insurance
They're doing
costs,
the same thing.
they're going through the work now, but our budget process is ahead of all the jurisdictions' budget processes. We need to get our budgets to them before they start their budgeting, right? So they have not yet gotten the final numbers for what they're going to need. We did also see an increase in our, Lindsay, I'm going to get it wrong. What's the pension?
Benefit.
Defined benefit retirement plan. But we got those numbers early enough for the first draft of this that you got. So that's already a factor here. There's an increase in retirement for JMRL employees on that plan. The medical wasn't ready yet. It was static the last 2 years. So the original version was a static. It's going to be the same. And we just learned the other day that it's going up. But we don't have final numbers on that yet.
Obviously, their providers have told
Yes.
going up.
They're expecting it to go up. And they expect the ceiling to be 5%, which is what this budget includes. So hopefully there'll be some room that we can come down when we get the actual numbers. Okay. Well, I'll move along, but feel free to jump back if you have any questions there. The next sheet is just a summary of the revenues that we're expecting in. So this is each jurisdiction's, what they're going to pay into JMRL next year, assuming that they adopt this budget. And this also includes state aid for next year. So this is the money from the state of Virginia that JMRL gets, and it pays for books and materials. It's our entire collections budget there. It is an increase. Those numbers are already set for next year. So it's $874,446. All but $25,000 of that goes towards items that people can use for the most part, along with some tools there. And then $25,000 is for supplies like barcodes and stickers and things that go on the materials. Okay, so that's the expected revenue for next year. We did also take out the minimum wage credit. That's what's coming out of JMRL's general fund next year, that $93,000. The rest of the budget is a branch by branch breakdown of all these costs. So those first kind of 3 sheets, that's the entire picture here. And then this is just a little bit more specific look at each location. Okay, so I'll point out a few things here for the first few, and then maybe we'll go at a faster clip through them and stop me if you have questions there. But so bookmobile, the top of it above the first, or rather the second yellow line is salaries and benefits. You're going to see at every location, that's the bulk of the costs here. That's what JMRL is asking the jurisdictions to pay for. Increases here because we are anticipating adding hours for the services to Louisa and Louisa and Nelson. So that's why there's a 12% increase in salary, and then Social Security and retirement. Life insurance is going to be slightly down in every single one of the next 16 categories here because we got an updated formula to use for what's actually being charged. This is another benefit that JMRL contracts with the city of Charlottesville for. For many years, we had been using one number, like apply this to your salary, and here's what the life insurance costs are going to be. We worked with the city to get a more accurate picture, which is slightly less. So it's down a little bit in every category. There's an increase in the vehicle repairs and maintenance and vehicle fuels here, operational costs, with the anticipation that the bill is going to be traveling throughout the 2 counties in Louisa and Nelson. Okay. Next page is the Historical Society. So this is one employee who works part-time at the Historical Society and part-time at Charlottesville. So this is the breakdown of their costs, basically. You can see, I neglected to mention that this budget includes a 2% salary increase for all staff, a cost of living increase for staff. So you can see that their salary, 2%, Social Security up 2%, retirement up 2%, life insurance down a little bit. You can see the change there is not huge. It's from $510 to $373, but that adds up over 100 employees. So. Okay. Central Library. This is a big one. Lots of different employees here and lots of different categories. This also includes a lot more operating expenses than some other localities, branches, basically, where JMRL is paying into these. It's because this is a shared facility between Albemarle and Charlottesville. So for instance, the cleaning that happens in the Greene County Library, Greene County is responsible for the cleaning of that building, and it doesn't show up in our budget. But in this case, since Charlottesville and Albemarle pay those things, we do pay directly to get it happen, to make it happen so that we can split the costs fairly between those 2 jurisdictions. Anything jump out here? Repairs, I mean, that's, it's an increase over last year's cost there, but it's more in line with the type of money that we have been spending on that building. I know there has been some discussion amongst the board about the need for a renovation of the central library, and it's just a fact that there are going to be costs escalating every year to kind of keep the holes in the dam plugged over time.
There's a huge
Literally.
jump
Yeah.
in
Don't take
the
the time.
telephone internal charges.
I think it's a drop in the internal.
Oh, no, it goes to 9,000 to 2023.
Yeah, but
Yeah, and then it's going to go down to 63.98 for next year.
Oh, okay.
So I think that, right, the 9,000 was an average of a few years before that. My guess would be that there was more phone call work being done during COVID, when we were having to call out to more long distance or whatnot. We might have also dropped some lines at some point during the last few years. So this is another one where it was an average, and we made the decision that we don't think actually next year that the costs are going to be that much.
travel went up. No, travel stayed the same. Travel stayed the It was only.
Travel rate sometimes.
What?
There we go. That's better. Aleta, was there a question there?
No, I was looking at the first 2, but it's the last 2 that I really need to be looking at.
Yeah, I think this is the same thing. This is the same question that Martha had on the big page, on the summary page. You're talking about the last few lines there. That it was that 7,200 and contracted services really should have been out of that one-time building and maintenance. So that's you look at those as one big category basically at that point.
And it's why, Aleta, there's nothing budgeted in 2023 and nothing proposed in 2024, because we know the city will direct charge us, but of course the money's still accounted in one pot, just somewhere different.
If we catch it in time, we can get them to move it too. We can say, hey, this came out of, here are the codes. Actually, everybody, this is real inside.
That's mine.
baseball.
Hey, there you go. That account number,
Yeah.
that's all I
So
see.
AJ can tell them like, hey, there was a charge in, in 530550 that should have been applied to 530670, and they can change it. We like to do that because it helps keep this neat. But this is the real picture. Okay. Prose, so similar pattern here, the bulk of the increases in salaries there. There's a very small, about a $300 increase in the operating expenses. Looks like that is all in the telephone charges there. So I'm guessing, AJ, that is an average of the usage over the last 2 years.
And if you look at 2022's actual, we've already under budgeted for 2023. So just trying to make that correction with how we budget in 2024. Still not thinking it will be exactly what 2022 was, but
Yeah,
making it realistic.
but being closer to
Yeah,
the
being closer to
actuals.
what it was.
I just said I wasn't going to do this, but here I
I
am
know.
doing it. Well, I don't want anybody to say later, like, hey.
You didn't go through mine.
But I think that should give you a pretty good picture of, the increases in the salaries and benefits there.
Yeah.
And then the slight tweaks in operational costs. The reason that Gordon's is kind of out of whack with everybody else's is because of the addition of a new 20-hour position there, which was the top priority of the personnel committee. Reason being that there's a capital project that's in theory happening in the beginning of next calendar year, so in January, February, to add a drive-up window at the Gordon Avenue branch, and they need a position in order to help staff that. So it's a new service that requires a new position here. Lindsay can tell you how much work it takes to run a drive-up window. So that's the big jump there. The rest of it is well in line. It's a 2% increase from staff, slight decrease in the life insurance. And then again, there are more operating expenses listed here because it's the way that JMRL can make sure that Albemarle and Charlottesville are paying their equivalent shares of the costs.
Green has a 1% salary increase.
Next page, green. Yeah, so likely that has to do with a change in somebody left and somebody got hired at a lower rate there.
Wow.
So it's not the same folks. Everybody who has been working there since at least it's 3 months before the end of the fiscal year will be eligible for the 2% raise. So even if somebody left now, if we hired their replacement within the next few months, they would get. Good catch though. There is a slight increase there in the service contracts line because JMRL has had to spend some money in the Greene County Library on kind of building maintenance type things. While there have been either emergencies or something that the county couldn't get to at that time, JMRL will help out where we can. But that's been happening at a clip in which we needed to put a little more money into it. And it's $200, so it's not going to break the bank, I hope. I really are. Okay, let's look at this library admin local. So this is the administration line here, and this is the one that on that grid sheet is shared between all 5 jurisdictions. So it includes salaries, and that's salaries for myself and the rest of the administration team. But then it also includes kind of regional operating costs here. So you see, like, this is where we would have postage. The line for books is not the actual line for books for the whole JMRL system. That's a specific thing that somebody charged a few years ago for $200. That's not the $200 is not what we spend on books. But at any rate, so here's where large the regional operating costs are, and you can see some movement here too. So for instance, a big one here in this 530100, the regional agreement fee. AJ and I have been working with the city to kind of separate that out into Now, next year, it's gonna be 540310, so you can see there was nothing there, and there's gonna be 122,000. We wanted to separate that out so that the cost that JMRL pays to the city of Charlottesville, as per our administrative services agreement there, it's written in the regional agreement that we pay 2% of our operating budget to Charlottesville every year, and in return, we get IT networking support, HR payroll support, and procurement finance support from them. So it was in a category that had some other things in there, including legal fees, like if JMRL went to our lawyer to get an opinion on something, and we wanted to separate that out so it could just be its own thing, and we could be sure that that was accounted for appropriately. So that's why, like, up here, we spent $129,000. This year, the budget's for 127, and next year we're asking for 5,000.
I noticed that earlier and I had my head down and something else. We already talked about
Yeah,
that.
so that's a perfect example of what part of this question was, right?
Okay.
All right, any other questions in this large category? And you get a chance again, so, you know, we'll review this today. This will not change, like this page won't change between, regardless of which version you all select today, between this and when the full board talks about it a week from Monday. This is, as I mentioned, $25,000 of the state aid gets pulled out to pay for materials for the technical services crew. It's like new stickers on books and the barcodes and the covers and things like that. Louisa County, so let's see, what are the service contracts? You know, we have similar issue to Greens where we had spent some money out there. Some of that was tied into the project to add the lockers to those buildings too. The JMRL had to spend some money in order to like get electric pulled or data pulled and things like that. So our average went up a little bit, and we're expecting similar types of costs next year. Montav, as I mentioned, split between Charlottesville and Albemarle. You can see a large dip in the retirement there because we had a retirement from somebody that was on the defined benefit plan, and the new hire is on the defined contribution plan, which is that's the only one we offer to new employees now because the library board a while ago decided that it would be more cost effective as a long term, and here's an example of that. Okay, Nelson County for Aleta. So 2% across the board, and this shows, to Martha's point earlier, this shows that, you know, it's the same staff basically because it's an even number there. It's going to be a 2% increase. Slight decrease in the life insurance. Repairs and maintenance, just slight uptick there just for needs that might pop up during the year in the new building, a few $100s. But overall, a very small increase for Nelson at the local level. So these are the things that, these are the dollars that the jurisdiction pays for Susan and her staff and things in that building. North side, big building, a lot of people. So this particular budget, this will look different in the all new personnel included version, because this does not include 2 new 20-hour positions that were requested by the staff here and were part of the recommendation by the personnel committee. It does include some other things, and we'll go through that list when we're done with this. But we'll talk about Northside specifically when we're finished here, maybe.
And you can see the rent increases.
Yes, you can see the last few years, like the jump between the 786 and the 890.
We were stick shocked too.
But we've been, you know, the county is the one that pays 80% of that. So we have been, you know, we have been in communication about that jump, and they're aware. So when we're having conversations with Albemarle County about their increase, you know, we'll make sure that they are aware that a large driving force there is that formula.
You charge yourself.
Something we all agreed
Yeah.
Scottsville branch, so we are requesting some support there on personnel, so that's why there's such a large increase in their salaries. And Social Security and retirement flows from that. Tech services, this is another of the regional costs, basically, that's split between all 5 jurisdictions. and it's largely, it's almost all salary there. It's only $1,000 that aren't salary or some sort of salary and benefit. Okay, I did exactly what I said I wasn't gonna do. And last line, this is the
That
books.
is the books.
This is the books and materials, you should say, if you're merited saying, it's not just books. Okay. So the, another supporting document that I sent you all the other day was the personnel request from the personnel committee. So now we can kind of go and look at this and see what the additions are here that this committee is going to have to make choices about. And effectively, the two budgets I offered, the one that we just went through includes everything here except for number 5 and number 10. So it does include some support for the Northside Library in terms of adding some substitute hours for the children's room, which is something I've consistently heard from Lindsay and from her staff, that they don't have the person power that they need to offer current services. I think especially this hit true during COVID when, I mean, still, we are asking staff, I am asking staff to provide programming where families are. So that means being able to offer a story time inside and when weather permits one outside, and then potentially some virtual programming as well. So you've got all of a sudden, you know, you were offering one model, which was everybody come in this room, or I guess the program room, and have story time. And now we're asking to, okay, well, can you also do that outside? And there is an outdoor story time, which is very popular here, that happens on the patio downstairs at the back of the
There
library.
are 3 per week outside.
Yeah. This is the last week of that. As we mentioned, snow, wind, rain, and
There's
snow.
1 in this room,
Yeah.
so 4 per week.
Yeah, so, you know, asking to do more with less, so that we need to try to support staff as best as we can there. I am hesitant about the new position, though, both new positions here, because in my discussions with our funding partners in the kind of pre-budget meeting that we had, the strong indication that I got was that there is an expectation, of course, the news is talking about it, that there's going to be a recession of some sort, or if not a recession, a slowdown continuing, and that some of our largest funding partners, regardless of whether or not there's a stamp on it saying this is a recession, are going to act as if there is a recession coming up, which means that it's not like they're going to freeze positions or hiring freeze or no salary adjustments or things like that, but they're gonna need a lot of justification for new positions. And the library is not competing with itself here. It's not a question of a new position at Northside versus a new position at Central or Louisa or Nelson. We're competing with the fire departments and with the, you know, the police departments and the facilities departments of our jurisdictions. So if the consensus there from our largest funders is that they're not really looking to add too many positions on their end, then it's going to be difficult to add new positions for library services unless we are, I think, offering something, a new service in return. So that's why the 2 new things that we have here were the top 2 priorities of the personnel committee, because this project at Gordon Avenue is happening. As long as we get a contractor that can do this work.
Someone bids on it.
Someone bids, you know, it's architects are working on it now, and there's going to be a service there, and nobody is interested in opening up a service that we can say, oh, it's only open from 9 to 10 a.m. on every other Thursday, you know, so we need staff in order to offer that. The staff that the Northside Library needs is for support of their programming that they're currently doing, services that they're offering. All those things are needed, but aren't offering the same return, basically, to go ahead.
I mean, we talked about this before, but something new just occurred to me is that even though we're saying new, not new services, in effect, if you're adding outdoor children, it is
Yeah, sure.
a new, because that's what we want, expansion and growth, but so it's tricky because it's a state program, but the growth is, I would say, new in that it's alternative outside or numbers accommodates kind of.
Yeah, I would say all
Yeah.
14 of the requests
Yeah, I know.
that came to the personnel committee, like there's no fat in there. There's all things that people need and can use. You know, certainly,
I know.
Lindsay, feel free to jump in at any time, you know, they
Oh.
could use the more
Yeah,
staff and support. This is the
Yeah.
busiest branch of the library system. It's
Yeah,
the highest circulation, highest foot traffic, highest usage. And so that's,
Just don't be so good.
you know, another issue here is all the services that are being offered. There's a young adult desk, there's a children's desk, there's a reference desk, there's a circulation desk, and there's a drive-up window. So there are 5 different points of service that needs to have somebody there while the library is open in order to provide that library service. So all those things
Can I
are
leap
important.
in for a
and needed.
second?
Yeah.
What we try to balance is covering the desks and doing the programs. Because if your staff member is doing the program, including the planning part, the going out and getting supplies part, then they can't do their desk shift. So we have to scramble. And every morning we recreate our desk schedule in a hallway over in the workroom area. And it takes the entire information staff, which is the children's team and adult services staff, because all of us, we meet in the hallway and we say, okay, Lindsay has a meeting this afternoon at 3 o'clock, so she can't be on the desk there, you know. So we'll plug her in over here. And that kind of scrambling happens. I'm sorry?
How long does that take everybody?
We meet at 9:30. We're pretty good at it, maybe 10 minutes.
Oh, wow.
There's some crying sometimes and weeping and.
To be clear, there are chairs available. Say it's in the hallway, it's because there's a big whiteboard that you use to do this, right? But-
Yes, it's in the hallway because there's a whiteboard
Yes,
and
yeah.
we do the schedule. So we have a
Yeah.
set the schedule, but we have to revise it.
Right.
daily. Well, you'll
Based on-
understand. We revise it and go, oh, well, Chris is on vacation this week, so scratch Chris out and put in it, you know, but we're good at it and everybody's very cooperative. So if Evan has 3 programs that week, we just work around Evan, you know.
And is it possible? Is that where you use subs?
We do use subs when we can. Yes, absolutely. And having a new, more hours for specialist sub will be very helpful for the children and teen staff particularly.
So that's the support that is included in the budget that we
Yes.
just went through.
Yes. and-
Substitute hours specifically allocated to the
makes-
children's room,
yeah.
correct?
Yes.
That's number,
Three.
number 3, and the other one is additional hours for, reference librarian position, number 9. Can you speak to that at all, Lindsay? You
Yeah.
mentioned yesterday what it helped
We
out with
have
you.
2 part-time reference librarians, and I'd actually asked for one of them to be made full-time, and that didn't even make the first cut, but that's okay. You'll see it again next year. I never give up. But, so the 2 part-time, one is 20 hours, and that's a position that is currently empty that we are doing interviews for. So we've been missing that one. But the other person is 28 hours, and she does several programs every month. She does the Wednesday night book club. She does the writers workshop. She manages all the art in the hallway. That's her job. She also, she does a lot of things. And we thought if we had 2 more hours for her, she could come in an hour before we open. Because I don't know, you all appreciate that an hour before you're open, you can get stuff done before you have to be on a desk. And right now, she only has 1 hour a week that she's here, that we're not open to the public. And then she's on the desk most of the time. So we thought 2 more hours would really, really help her and help us. I hope I made that clear. I'm finished.
So these are the tough choices. You know, definitely the personnel committee, and I agree, feels that these first 2 priorities are the top priorities. One of the reasons there is that those bookmobile hours are going to be entirely up to those 2 jurisdictions. If they decide not to fund those and it doesn't have a regional impact, you know, it's going to be up to them. They would get a new service for those new dollars. The Gordon Avenue one is because of this capital project that's happening there. And then, you know, the rest of them, that's the list that the personnel committee decided upon for importance. Go ahead.
You said the number, forget which one it was, the children's specialist extra hours was included. I'm just trying to keep straight what was in the budget we just looked
For
over.
North Side specifically,
Well, no, across, for everything. we're looking
everything
at,
here except for number 5
And number
and
10
number
are on that budget. Okay. It was the top priorities, the top that then all of a sudden made me second guess that and wonder if just
Yeah.
those top 2 were in here and okay, but I'm following you now. That's
Got it.
what I-
Yeah, that's not your problem. It's
That's
my,
what I
it's
thought.
a confusing thing that I tried to explain in a 4-way, I'm sure.
No, you're fine. So everything, okay, except 5 and 10, which is what's represented on the left side of that chart at the bottom, is what was in. Okay,
Yes.
gotcha.
And the main split there was the not asking for new positions from Albemarle County.
Right,
You
right,
know, I'm
right.
trying to, because they're increase is a sizable increase for just the things that we would consider to be must-haves. Cost of living increase for staff, keeping up with year 2 of the minimum wage adjustment, paying for the rent for this building.
Yeah.
You know, those things really are hopefully non-negotiable for the library board. Although we haven't had that stated conversation, I think it's safe to say that I know that the minimum wage adjustment is and has been. You know, we can't go back on that at this point and tell staff that like, oh wait, you're gonna make
going
less
back
money
to
now.
that.
Yeah.
And our staff certainly deserves a cost of living increase and much, much more. Also, in the back of my mind is the knowledge that the salary study that JMRL is part of with the city of Charlottesville is going to be done sometime maybe by the end of this year. It's too late for it to make it into this budgeting process, but we need to start working it into the next few years, and it's going to come with significant costs. I can't see a scenario in which it doesn't come with a significant price tag. So working with our jurisdictional partners to get that funded in the next few years is likely going to be a big priority of myself and the library board. We want to be good partners where we can and spend our capital where we should.
I'm struggling with this one, because I hear what you're saying about the reasonable sort of costs here, especially for Albemarle. And I think from what I'm hearing goes into that, it's going to be, a lot of it's kind of non-negotiable, right? Like, I think we're bringing it up to the $15 minimum wage that they're already at.
Yeah.
That's, you know, their 2/3 share of that is a big part of this increase. It's healthcare costs,
Yeah.
which, you know,
Can't
can't change. And it's the rent agreement with which both parties are signed, and, you know, and they're paying most of that money right back to us. So, you know, on the one hand, it does kind of feel like there's room there. And especially when you say, you know, we're gonna have this recomp, you know, coming through the pipeline in the next few years, that kind of makes me think it's going to be harder to come back and start talking about, you know, I guess that's what I'm really trying to weigh is, okay, there's a difficulty this year in asking for new positions, because I know the county is like you say, you know, sort of trying to put the kibosh on a lot of that across the board. But I think, you know, as an organization, we kind of have to weigh our interests now versus then. And is this, you know, going to be more difficult to do then versus the difficulty we're already
concur
facing
with
now?
that analysis, in that if we're going to try to get some new positions, we probably want to try to push those through at this point.
It's going to be, you know, it's going to be a recommendation to the board. You know, I two other concerns. I have a concern that lumping the new positions here in with the new position at Gordon Avenue is going to mean the baby in the bathwater, which is going to be a problem when that new window opens and there's nobody to be there for it. So that's definitely, I agree with the personnel committee's suggestion that that's the top priority there. I forgot what the other one was. I've got another one back here somewhere. Oh, yeah, you know, there has been discussion about added hours and services at various locations around JMRL, including this one. And I believe that that's the time to push for new positions when we talk about adding hours and services here at this branch. We got a request from the Albemarle Board of Supervisors, remember a few years ago, from one member about added hours here. And to me, that can't happen with the current setup that they have. So if the county is interested in more services here, then definitely we come back to them with a plan that includes this and more for the services they were interested in. Lindsay described it yesterday as Cadillac services.
Well, that is an interesting consideration of if we lump these all together and they say no to any new positions, how much harder does it get to then try to split off the Gordon Avenue position and say, well, but wait, we really actually do need this one. Or
Yeah, that's my concern.
there's a functional service that can't start without that. Oh gosh. An easy spot.
Oh, you know about budget work, right?
Well, but
It's easy. Are there questions about, so you see I think we've nailed down what the only two differences are between these two budgets. Are there any questions about any of these other positional requests or anything else that was in the budget that we just reviewed? All this body does is make a recommendation to the full board. So it's a full board decision, ultimately. We can present to them whatever this group thinks is the best decision.
Yeah, I have a feeling whatever we present, we're probably rehashing with the full board.
But the board won't necessarily see.
The
both
other
of these.
option, right? Yeah, well. If there are questions about those, though, I think. Um.
Well, the 5 and the 10, I was looking, there's like this, quite a bit of funds there, almost $50,000, that, for those two positions, and it's basically for the jobs filling tomorrow. But then with the increase in the insurance and the healthcare and stuff like that, which is also probably another 50,000.
It was about 50,000. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, and that's not even with those 5 and 10, you know.
And I was certainly kicking the teeth the other day to realize there was an additional $50,000 expense after we had, tried to get everything. And in fact, that's a good point, Aleta, because this document was done before that medical increase. So actually these are slightly low. They're 5% lower than the medical costs on there, which is not going to be millions of dollars, but it would be.
The real numbers are on the grid sheet.
Yeah.
So if you look at the one grid sheet and the other grid sheet,
Yeah.
they are updated on that.
The personnel cheat sheet is out of date.
Yeah.
already.
The numbers are real.
Between the two budgets.
Between the two budgets.
Yes, correct.
Those-
I think that's where I tend to lean to this one.
And is there any way rectifying or adding if in fact the health costs are, but we need to present it?
Yeah, before
Okay.
then, and also those health costs are across the board. They're the whole region. So it's not just savings. If there are savings there, it would just be Albemarle, Charlotte.
Right.
So do I hear anyone brave enough to make and this is not a voting body, we'll just by consensus recommendation.
I'm curious to hear a little bit more, if you would feel comfortable sharing about what the budget guidance that you got from Charlottesville and Albemarle was in terms of new positions and expansion of costs outside of expansion. So
What I heard from our largest funder was that they recently went through a study of projected revenues and expenses in the next few years with a group out of Virginia Tech, my understanding, and that the information that they got back from that was pretty bleak in terms of like the money that's going to be coming in versus the money that's going to be going out. And there was a Daily Progress article to that extent the other day too, which basically said, more money needs to be spent than is coming in. So that combined with the assumption that there is going to be less revenue because of a coming recession, or at least we had better prepare that way. Nobody, Thomas, came out and said, don't ask for any new positions. There was no guidance to that effect. It was just my impressions of what the impact of the current economic situation is going to be on Albemarle County's budgeting process.
and for Charlottesville, similar.
Similar, Charlottesville has even larger concerns because they are going to have this salary study done for their own budgeting. They're planning on, I believe, attempting to get that salary into place for next year. They also are one of the few localities in the state that has passed a collective bargaining ordinance. So they're going to have new costs associated with that, startup costs associated with offices in order to make that happen. And then the assumption that there are other costs that are going to go up in collective bargaining. And both of those jurisdictions also talked about the end of federal COVID funding, basically, where they had started programs with that funding over the years that now they were going to have to take over the full cost for. So both Charlottesville and Albemarle said that at this point, most, like similar to what you said about our budget, most of it, they don't have any choice over. It's already in there for next year. And the room for new things is much smaller than it has been in the past.
So they're not saying we're not gonna, don't ask for any new position, but they're saying hint, hint.
And with the salary study, you were referring to the one Charlottesville.
Correct.
And just for someone who's not familiar with that, what would that entail and what is the purpose of?
So the city has hired an outside consulting service to do this, and they required from all of our staff to fill out these PDQs. It's like basically here's a 10-page document. Tell us everything that you do every day, and
For every single one of us.
for every single employee at JMRL, which was great. So they all filled those out. We collected them all. I read every single one. We collated that. We sent that information to the city. They're doing that with their own staff as well. So it's going to come out with a new salary structure for them. They're going to have a new pay scale, basically saying like, here's these positions are grouped together because they do these types of work. And here's what the scale should start at. And here's where it should go. And whether or not city council adopts that on their end, I don't know. I haven't seen the results, but I can guarantee you it's not going to come back and say everyone is appropriately compensated for the work.
All your government employees are.
Yes. Really large off of the, yeah. So they're going to have to figure out how to fund that for their own staff. It's going to be, I'm sure, an increase over what they're paying now for staff.
With the new, whatever, with the results are
Correct.
going to generate
Correct.
new funds.
Yes.
Are going to require.
They're going to require new monies, and they're expecting to get that before they do their fiscal year 24 budgeting, which is what we're working on here now. So they likely will have those costs in their budget for next year. JMRL is not going to be able to do that. We're not going to be able to budget for that next year because we don't have that data yet, and we need to get this budget done.
And Emerald County is going through the same process.
And does that, if they, I presume they have to adopt the study, or.
Not necessarily. That'll be up to the city council, I believe. But I can't imagine them paying all this money.
Right.
Back and say,
Trash.
Yeah.
And
it might take a while. It might not all be at once.
so it would result in different classifications and
Potentially.
scale.
And we potentially might get the same thing. I don't know what the output is going to look like, but we might get a whole new set of like these folks are group. We have our own bands and stages, and they might come back and say these should be rearranged in this way or that way.
And then paying for the cost of the study itself.
That JMRL does not have to do. The city of Charlottesville paid for that and graciously included us as part of what we pay
Not
for
that
HR
much.
support. So no, we did not have to pay for that study, which is great because it was very expensive. Now, the library has traditionally lagged the city and Albemarle County when it comes to our pay scale, basically. We just got to the $15 this July. City of Charlottesville was there, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. Albemarle County was there several years ago. So traditionally, they will take care of their own staff first, and then we will work with them to try and catch up.
Well, and the other thing, I'm stuck on story time.
It's important, very important.
Welcome to come.
But,
You have to come tomorrow, though.
yeah. The one we're presented with does not have the additional 20 hours for circulation or children. Right. So, but it does include the substitute hours. So it's a little help, but not what's needed for growth.
Right. Well, substitute would not be doing your story time.
Right, but they would be freeing someone else to
Somebody
do
else to
it,
do it,
right,
yeah.
right, which would be a help, not ideal, not where you want to be, but maybe.
I've
Where, what,
I personally
Okay.
do not love substitute hours positions as, because it's for exactly that reason, it's a Band-Aid. You know, that they don't, the substitutes don't get evaluated on the same schedule as library staff. They don't necessarily get the benefits of all the training as library staff. They don't get the benefits that other library staff has.
And they
They
only
don't get-
get raises.
They only get raises when the pay scale changes, you know, so you're asking somebody to stand up and work with the public and represent the organization, but they don't have the same level of training as everybody else. So in an ideal world, we would have enough salaried staff to cover all those things, but JMRL for years and years and years has used this as a way to kind of bridge these gaps. And then sometimes we are able to, like, when you were the chair of the budget committee, we were able to successfully take, the Scottsville Library had a lot of
More
substitute
than
hours.
2,200 hours. And
Yes,
said that's a full.
you were able to say, you know what, like, instead of
Make
paying
that a
this, let's
position.
turn that into a position. So sometimes
Can't
it's
do that here.
we don't have the substitute hours to do that with here at Northside,
I'm
but
trying to-
something that we could do down the road if we can get some
Three
substitute. hours.
hundred there.
Mm. Okay,
And veterans, well, that's a different ballgame, so it's just. And the other sub hours are at central.
mhm.
Crozet is actually, I will mention something about that specifically. They are doing a horse trade here, basically, where that cost is a net cost because they are going to trade in some sub hours for a different type of position in order to ask for this, which is this is a specialist position, can do a small amount of programming. This would not be a separate substitute. These would be additional substitute hours for the current person in that position.
So they would.
So it's a 20-hour person and they would be able to say to them, can you work 2 hours this weekend to go to the Crozet Farmers Market and make library cards, things like that. So they would trade some of the in-house work, 100 hours of one to get the other one, but it's at a higher rate.
Okay, and so the 2,000.
Yeah, sorry, I should
Yeah,
have pointed
difference
that out.
between the
Right.
two
It's a
rates,
difference
gotcha.
between the two rates.
Okay, so what's our?
So we need a recommendation for the library board.
Need a recommendation.
It's not an easy decision. Like I said, all these, and the personnel committee went through a tough job because there were 4 other positions that didn't even make it to this level. And on behalf of our staff and our managers, they held the line for several years during COVID when we basically said, don't ask for anything right now. We're not going to get anything. So this is the result of several years of making it work. And then saying this year, like, ask for what you need and we'll figure out what we can do. And this is the answer.
So I'm trying to listen keenly for what you're saying here, knowing that you're going to be the one who has to go in and negotiate for this.
Not coming with me?
And
So, sorry. Go ahead.
no,
Well, so I'm hearing what you're saying about it being hard to separate, it potentially being hard to separate new positions once we go down that road, if they try to put the lid on that. You said something earlier about the previous request from Albemarle County Board of Supervisors about increasing services here. What do you think are sort of most optimistic and maybe most realistic scenarios are for implementing that down the road, if not,
I
as a
think
part of this?
that's a great question. I think it would have to take a backseat to the salary adjustment. I don't think that we could come in with year 1 of a salary adjustment that potentially would be, who knows how much it will be.
Mhm.
And at the same time say, plus we need 5 new positions in order to offer these services on these days, hours.
Mhm.
So I think that, yeah, that would be, to Martha's point, it would be pushing this down several years probably.
Yeah.
Not that we wouldn't come back and ask for it next year. Who knows what will happen with the salary study? Maybe the impact won't be as dramatic as I think it will be. Maybe they will say everybody is being paid the.
and so if, is there any negotiation?
Yeah, I mean, it's,
When you get there?
it's always
I mean-
a give and take,
Right, so,
but when decisions are made by those elected officials, they are final.
And what I remember you always saying, when I was the chair of this before, 2 years ago, whatever it was, through this process was that as an organization, we've always been very good about being, if not modest in our requests, at least very sort of empathetic to the funding jurisdiction's, ability to work with us. And so not, coming in with a needs-based budget every year and saying, this is everything we can imagine and letting them do the work of whittling down.
We want it.
And clearly we already have. I mean, what the personnel committee has done, taking things off the table and what we're doing here, I think that's going on, but yeah.
I think we have built up a certain amount of capital and trust because of that,
Mhm.
where especially our largest funding partners believe us when we say we need these things now, So it's always a negotiation and it's always some spending of that capital. And it depends on what the board's priorities are for, here's what we absolutely need to get back for this.
I think what I'm inclined to do as a recommendation coming out of this committee is to say, let's recommend it with 5 and 10. But bring this concern at
To
the
our
board level.
full.
Okay, board, this is us spending capital, right? This is us spending political capital at these levels by making this ask. And is that something we all really, in at this moment right now with everything else going on and all of our other potential needs for political capital, is this where we want to be spending it?
I don't know. I know these are things that need to be done. But, they've already given us a sneak peek of, things are really bad down the line. And for us to say, yeah, okay, yeah, they're bad on the line, but this is what we
Right,
want. This is what we need.
Yeah, I know.
I'm kind of, I'm leaning toward not having the 5 and 10.
I think also considering how long we won't have 5 and 10 if we don't do it now too, which I think is something also that we're trying to weigh against. Should the salary study come out and then the board wants to, us want to move forward with, okay, we're going to try to get the staff up to appropriate pay. Then I wonder how long do we, to Martha's point, how long does it get kicked down the line if we're almost kind of foreshadowing here or kind of hinting each other that if the salary study comes out and the staff is underpaid, then we're not gonna ignore that as a body. Then what? Do we say like, is it gonna be either or? Or are we gonna say?
That's when I want this capital.
And it's that, that's what drives the whole purpose of. I mean, there's no way they're gonna come back and say, oh, they're paying them too much.
Right, yeah, but I think it'll be, it's almost like we're doing the budget committee meeting for next year. So it's like, so are we going to then tell staff or managers next year, hey, our priority is going to be getting the staff that we have appropriately paid, don't ask for new positions. Like if I know we were doing 2 budget years at one time.
I know.
Welcome to my life. I always do 2 budget years at one time.
I think it would be more like the priority, similar to this year, there are 2 top priorities here. I imagine that next year, the board's priority and my priority will be the salary study, at least funding the first year of whatever that, maybe that's a 20-year plan.
How much they say, yeah.
But I don't think it means saying to people, don't ask for things, but I think it means saying to them, like, only ask for what you really need.
Okay.
At this point.
I hear you.
That's where I'm stuck, because I think it's easier to sell, oh, we need this because these are new services kind of thing. That's very easy to see. But the success demands attention as well. So we're always going to be stuck. If you're doing.
Well, and
you know,
to
where
that
do you-
point, I would say, especially since we're talking about Albemarle here, they are funding this library system at
I
a
know,
very,
more than-
very
I
good rate.
forget that. I'm down here.
They put a lot of money into libraries every year
Yeah.
and they get returns for it. It's always, they do a citizen survey every year and it's always one of the top rated things that they hear from their citizens is we like the library.
Yeah.
So they're satisfied with services. You know, we're providing good value for them. It would be a lot more expensive if they had to do this without the regional system, but they are still finding it at, they're good
And
partners
then
in this.
You have already some supervisor support for increased services, right? And did you say the board of supervisors or someone had said they wanted?
There is some interest on the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors from individuals adding hours.
Yeah, so maybe that would,
It'd have to be more than these two positions.
Yeah, it would have to
though.
be a lot for
We
what they
open
want.
on Sundays will require.
oh, yeah,
overtime.
but we could get, I mean, that, at least there might be some hope for this.
Like,
Some advocacy.
In the, let's say next year there is a salary study that, and you got the results and you want to increase salaries for staff.
Yeah.
This would also, and there additionally, you'd be doing the third year of the minimum wage adjustment too?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't know if that, the salary study would replace the minimum wage.
No.
No, it'd be the third year. So it would be two
Yeah.
things you'd be saying.
And I'm just thinking that their continued support and maybe additional advocacy and a plan and maybe the outreach program that or the emphasis on outreach and all could generate enough public and political support. So it wouldn't, if those two were not included here, so it wouldn't be a surprise and you'd have some backing and I don't know, because I know how hard that is.
No, but I see what you're saying about
Yeah.
those two at 5 and 10, that if we get to the point where there really is the sort of political momentum asking for
Yeah.
that expansion of services, then it's not coming from us to
Exactly.
ask for that. And that preserves that capital that David's talking about needing when we get to the point of.
Right.
the-
And as a board, that is part of our
Mhm.
responsibility. And
I was right on the fence. I think I've been swayed.
To what?
To omit them, if there's reasonable thought that, we still have avenues to tackle that later, and this is a big enough fight to take in the current climate right now.
Krista or Lisa, did either of you have any thoughts or comments at this point? Sorry, we got a little table occupied here. Yeah.
No, I'm here and I'm paying very detailed attention. And I think that it is a sticky situation that's been described. But I think if you think there is a chance that we'll be able to have success later, then maybe that's what we should do.
Krista, any thoughts?
Not in addition to what's already been said, no.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, AJ. I just didn't want to leave anybody out of the discussion.
anybody like to make,
We're not doing a voting body, so.
No, no.
this has to be-
but I mean, just a recommendation, we're all on the same page. Martha weighed in a little bit.
Yeah, I just. I've been so often in the position of, as an educator, providing additional services and additional services and additional services and
Not additional.
not getting no compensation for it. And, I look at the children's specialist position and I know that early literacy is just so critical. It would pain me to not have the support of what those positions can do. I just feel real strong. It's an important position.
Oh, I don't think
Yeah.
it's ever not.
Yeah, but I
Yeah, I know what you
understand,
mean.
I
Yeah,
understand
yeah,
this balance that has to go on. And, David, I will go with your experience in that there's a possibility in the future for us, to get these positions. I also think that there needs to be, and because I'm not in that jurisdiction, I don't see those things. But maybe a lot of noise made about what is going on currently and how many hours are used, and so then the public is aware, so then when we go to the next step, there's already a like, oh my
Right.
gosh, yeah.
And that's part of our job.
Yeah.
And I think with our new publicity person, that even got to it. Because we got so much.
What are, I have to give myself more work, so I'm very concerned about this suggestion. Do we have to think of them as a package deal? Could we make an argument for 5 that we can't make for 10? In other words, because Lindsay has said, hey, we went from, X amount of screen times a week to X amount, and we're tasked with meeting families to their comfort level. So that means virtual, that means outside, and that means inside, which was not consideration before. Could we, David, I'm saying the understood we, the royal we, could we pitch that one as a new position because we are offering new services? And perhaps if our argument for search support number 10 isn't as strong, could we drop that one? Or do we have to think about it as a package?
The board can do whatever they want. I remain concerned about the
even
new
even
position.
just that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would have the same concern with it's not the
Not-
dollar amount, it's the new position.
Understood.
Right.
Okay.
But it does sound like, yeah, that one lives in a little more of a gray area where there's.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe-
Martha-
maybe
It's, yeah,
We could
That's what I'm
push it a little
saying.
bit.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It is
but-
new services in the sense of expanding.
But not as new as the new drive up window at Gordon.
Right.
Yeah.
Another concern is that, right, so we're talking about down the road offering new services, and Lindsay named what it would be Sunday hours here at this location, right?
We
So,
just- yeah.
that request came from supervisors, and if we go back to them and say, we need more positions at Northside specifically,
Then
then
they might say.
there's gonna be an expectation for that, and this is not enough
Yeah.
to make that happen.
Mhm.
So I'd rather come with a
The
whole
whole
plan.
thing.
Here's
Right.
what
Sunday, here's what
it
it
costs for
is.
Sunday hours, which we decided not to do this year. I don't think the staff has the capacity right now on the tail end of COVID, even with new positions. That didn't sound, I didn't hear a lot of, we really want to add these hours at this point
No.
from staff.
That is a sage way to look at it.
You have 5 service desks you would have to staff on Sunday.
I was gonna say, not if she has to meet 9:30 and.
It would be
change
a
the
challenge without.
But it's not to say that we wouldn't like to offer that service, and I know that it would be used. I know there's, right now, that only the central library has Sunday hours. That's the only option in the city.
Letting the cat out of the bag for the rest of us have it, not that has anything to do with it, but
It comes up
These,
in other
we
jurisdictions
get
as
it
well.
all the time, and they need staff right now
Yeah.
as is, so they would then now be able to say, they have it, why can't we for the same price, for the same cost?
This is a good discussion. I think you all hit all the
All the
issues
issues.
that we're facing here. And the board's gonna have to make a tough choice here. And it's not to say either one of these that we bring to the jurisdictions, we might end up not getting more
Yeah.
than what we're talking about here.
Right.
Some of these other things on this list might be cut. There are some other places where we might have to try to find economies, so this is only what our board
Would like.
would like, then it goes to a whole nother level of scrutiny.
So I'm hearing then that we present to our board what the proposed budget minus 5 and 10, which is what it is, as is. What that is.
No one feels great about it, but I think.
I know, right?
I know,
Like,
I'm not-
good compromise makes everybody unhappy, right?
Smile.
No, this does make me want to start thinking in a more focused sense on this idea of Sunday expansion here, since it's been asked for, since there seems to be sort of staff interest in the peripheral kind of benefits of the overall expand. I wonder what we can do in a more focused way to move on that. But yeah, I think we've got enough to chew on there in negotiations with that. I agree.
Martha, can you live with that?
Yeah, I can live with that.
Misty, can you live with that?
Happily.
I'm very realistic. I think that, yes, and I appreciate the inclusion of the things that are included, so thank you. We'll come back next year with more.
Any objections from Lisa or Krista?
Nope, not for me. Thank you.
That sounds like a consensus recommendation for the board.
Yeah.
So I'll send out to the full board a version of the top priorities budget this afternoon. And then we will have this whole conversation again. a week from Monday.
Which is not gender related. Our new outreach coordinator,
It's Marion, who is our bookmobile supervisor.
she does.
She is the bookmobile and outreach services coordinator. So to Martha's point about new services and no new personnel for it, you know, it was a position that for many years was in charge of the bookmobile. We would like to build a department that's an outreach department to support the system. So this is baby steps towards that, you know, adding some service to Nelson and Louisa, and then hopefully coming back to Green next year and saying, you know, we'd like to add this service here as well, and here's what the value is. But I'm sorry, what was the question?
No, I think of the physical outreach, but I'm also thinking ahead. I also see outreach as publicity, as advocacy in the community, letting them know all the wonderful things that the library does. And to me, you can't do that enough.
I agree.
And we don't, I know I don't in Louisa do it enough.
Do a pretty good job.
Can I mention something? Historically, there used to be an extension department.
Correct.
There was a person who was in charge of all the branches, including the bookmobile and all the rest of us branches. And so there was a position, and then she was also in charge of extension and outreach.
It's called Head of Extension Services.
And yeah, and so, and including, we had a books by mail program for a short while, a couple of years I know, a long time ago. And that included a couple counties that aren't part of the regional system, but there was a grant written and we went in with Madison and Culpeper, Madison and Orange,
Oh my God.
Madison and did a books by mail program until the grant ran out. So there were different kinds of things happening. But then that position was done away with in a budget crunch of many years ago.
And I'm excited because I think sometimes it's just, it's a combination of the position, but also it deals with the expansion that's really happening and the success that you're happening. If people don't hear and appreciate that I know in my county, I have friends who use the library, but they're still getting books. And somebody said, "Oh, I'm going on a trip. I have to go get a CD." I said, "Well, why do you do that? Why don't you just pair your Bluetooth to your speaker?" You can do that.
Depends on your car.
Yeah. I have a manual. But she doesn't. And she's like, "Oh," I said, "and you can download it." "Oh, I can do that from the," and I said, "Yes, we're gonna have a class." So, and I'm just a little outsider, but everybody in the, if she doesn't know, we're not doing a good job. And I don't mean you. When I say we, I'm talking of letting people know how fantastic.
Yeah, the resources are.
The children's hour, I always, people see, when, at least I do, want to go to the library and they're all in the realize it. But, so I think we can all do a better job without, yes, so that they can see that we need these new services to this extent. But we're competing with so much. I'm sorry, I got sidetracked.
Okay, I was enthralled. Would you like to start us?
Oh, yes. Does anybody have anything else? I forget. Else they'd like to ask or comment on? If not, we'll send our recommendation and thoughts with some summary to the committee and others. Not would we adjourn?
Sounds good. Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy, for successfully